Globalization. Do you hear this word anymore? You know, when I was in college back in the late 1990s, the really big political battle of the time, the thing that drove young and old people alike into the streets to protest, including myself, was this issue of globalization, which you probably never hear about anymore. So maybe it still matters, maybe it doesn't. But anyways, here's the essence of the debate. On one side, you had all these big international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, all backed by the world's economic elite, using their huge financial clout to compel developing countries and their economies to open up to the free flow of money, goods, and services from the global north. The free market, they claimed, was going to produce wealth on a scale never seen before. It was going to lift everyone from poverty, it was going to usher in a prosperous and peaceful new global order. And in a word, well, they were kind of right, and they were kind of wrong. Now, on the other side of the debate, there was this extremely diverse conglomerate of social groups, from subsistence farmers in Mexico to environmental activists in Canada and the US to auto manufacturers and lumberjacks all over the Pacific Northwest, as well as college students all over, including myself at the time. And all these people came together en masse to protest these trends in economic and cultural and political globalization, and they rightfully claimed these would lead to dramatic increases in inequality, which it did, and environmental degradation, which it also did, and job loss in both the industrial and developing world. And yeah, it did that too, although I suppose you also got some job creation as well. But our obsession about globalization and all the debates about whether it was saving the world or it was destroying it, these vanished into thin air after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. Suddenly, all of our focus was on terrorism, national security, drug cartels, and immigration. However, globalization never stopped happening, and it never stopped deepening as the years went by. And as a consequence to our daily lives, we saw globalization get more intense, and the consequences even more intensive. And if you ask me, yes, it still matters quite a bit. So what is globalization and how is it changing our lives? A simple definition would go something like this. Globalization is the process of expanding linkages between states, societies, and economies. Likewise, there are three different dimensions of globalization that are worth considering here: the political, the economic, and the cultural. In practice, these dimensions are not really easy to separate, as linkages made in one realm almost necessarily impact linkages in another. Theoretically, however, we can distinguish them and evaluate them somewhat independently. First, political globalization concerns the increase in formal agreements between countries to work together in making and enforcing common policy. The most advanced example of this in terms of intensity is probably the European Union, which over the past few decades has succeeded not only in opening up dozens of national borders to the free flow of goods, services, and people among its member states, but has also created international decision-making institutions like the European Parliament, for example, that directly shape and constrain the lives of people in all 27 of the EU's member states. And it used to be 28 until the UK Brexited it in 2016, but that's for another time. Other examples of political globalization include the United Nations, which you're very familiar with, I'm sure, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, and there are numerous other intergovernmental bodies as well, the vast majority of which came into existence in the decades following the Second World War. Now, the conflict around political globalization typically revolves around the fear on one side that democracy and national sovereignty could be compromised as a result of it. For example, there was a big movement in the US in the 1990s to withdraw from the United Nations, lest a bunch of liberal Europeans try to take away our Second Amendment right to bear arms, or to tell us we can't spray DEET on our crops anymore, or to make us call Hershey's something other than chocolate. On the global-philic side of things, those who like globalization, many others argued that nationalism and national sovereignty itself was a dangerous force that compelled societies to make war against each other. And therefore, globalization was in fact good because it might do away with all that nonsense once and for all. So, one world, ready or not, that's where we're going. Wouldn't that be lovely? Now, the second dimension of globalization, the economic globalization, refers to the increase in global trade and interdependence of production and exchange. Naturally, proponents of free trade here are the globophiles. And they'll argue that this element of globalization not only increases wealth for everyone, but it also increases the cost and therefore decreases the risk of serious international conflict, such as your interstate wars. States won't go to war with each other if they get rich from trading one another, the argument goes. Of course, the globophobes, those afraid of globalization, argue back that the cost of this interdependence is very high, especially for poor countries who, as a result of it, may become permanently locked into an inferior position in the global economic hierarchy. So just recall Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory, for example. Finally, the third dimension, cultural globalization. This refers to the ways in which the world's diverse cultures supposedly gravitate towards one common cosmopolitan worldview in form of being or expression. In the early days of globophobic protests, the big fear here was that it was really an American capitalism that was the culture being globalized, and that pretty soon the whole world was just going to look like a giant Walmart, suffocating local cultures everywhere in the process. Now, 20 or 30 years later, it does seem those fears might be somewhat exaggerated. Maybe, I'll leave that up to you. I mean, American cultural hegemony has definitely declined a bit, and local cultures all over the world have found expression and survival through the very tools and mechanisms of capitalism itself. And you can just take K-pop, for example, or what my personal favorite is, Brazilian slum funk.
É que o povo se estressa porque a gente se juntou, apenas se juntou, né, bebê? Mas me perdoa, meu amor, porque isso apenas começou. Uai!
On the other hand, the globophiles of times past also had it wrong. They thought cultural globalization, driven by the spread of internet access around the world, was going to increase overall levels of social trust and tolerance for others by breaking down the barriers of race, religion, national, and regional identity. And while that is certainly true for part of the population, maybe it's true for you, world value surveys do indicate today that distrust between groups has increased, not decreased, over the past 2 decades. And we can clearly see this play out politically in the stunning rise of right-wing nationalist and populist movements across the world. You just have to think about Brexit in the UK, or Marine Le Pen in France, or Donald Trump in the United States to illustrate this. Okay, now I want to put this question back on you. Does the debate about globalization, which you never hear about anymore, does it still matter? And if so, is it something we should promote or try to stop? What are the consequences of trying either way? Would it be a bit like trying to stuff the cat back in the bag? Would it bring peace, or would it bring war? Do we see political movements trying to stop it today or move it forward? Perhaps using other terminology to justify their goals and their actions. You tell me. I'm Professor Michael Wolff, and this is Comparative Politics Online.